start. It should start any minute now.
Okay.
There we are.
There we are. So recording has started. So if you remain in the meeting, you are deemed to have given your permission to be recorded. There's no other recording allowed, by the way, only this. Right. Okay, we have 2 decision items this morning. So first of all, I should say, this is the last meeting before Christmas, so Merry Christmas to everybody if I forget at the end, because sometimes it's a bit hectic and I do forget at the end. We got 2 decision items this morning, and the papers come with an amendment sheet which you should all have received, and one of the agenda items is on a separate document that comes with the agenda. That's the delegated decisions. So just to make sure you've got all the documents, you should have the document pack, the amendment sheet, the delegated decisions, and of course Steve's presentation that he sends around by email, which you're going to be sharing anyway, Steve, yeah? Yeah, okay. Right, if I can just give me a second to get back to the agenda. Okay, right. So Jane, would you be so kind as to make a roll call of all attendees to the committee, and also ask them if they have any matters of interest to declare?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So, Chair, we could start with you. Have you got any items, declarations of interest?
No, I haven't, Jane, and I am here.
Sean, Councillor Percy, again, have you got any declarations of interest?
Present and no interest to declare, thank you.
Councillor Chris Jones. Councillor Scott Bamsey. Councillor Ros Davis.
Presennol and no interest to declare. Diolch yn fawr.
Councillor Hunt.
I'm here, Jane, and I have no interest to declare.
Councillor Woolcock.
I'm present, Chair, and I have an interest to declare in as much as I'm a member of the Porthwr-Watkins Site Liaison Committee. It's a personal interest, so I don't need to withdraw from the meeting, and I'm allowed to vote.
Thank you, Councillor.
Chair, I will send the declarations form to Councillor Woolcock for him to complete.
Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Present, Chair, with no interest to declare.
Councillor Renkus.
Present and no interest to declare.
Thank you. And Councillor Wingrave. Right, we'll go now to ward members. Councillor Ned Purcell. Councillor Purcell.
Thank you. Yes, present, and I'm also a member of the Porthwr-Watkins Liaison Committee, but like Councillor Woolcock, it's a personal interest and I don't have a vote anyway, but I'm okay to speak.
And Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
Present, and like the other 2 local councillors, I'm a member of the Porthwr-Watkins Liaison Committee, personal interest, and again, I don't have a vote.
If I could go to officers now. Steve Ball.
Yes, present, thank you very much.
Rebecca McGregor.
Present, good morning everyone.
Kelvin Davis. Liam Morgan.
Morning, present.
Lovely, thank you, Kelvin. Liam Morgan.
Present, good morning.
Is Terry Davis here? Justin Griffiths.
Yeah, present. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
And I also have a speaker, Matt Nichols. Mr. Nichols, are you here?
Yes, yeah, good morning. It's surname is Nicholson.
Nicholson, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. We also have a member of the public here, Matthew Roberts. Just for you to know, Chair. Is there anyone else present now at today's meeting that I haven't called out?
Yeah, me, Tom Boothwaite, Planning Officer. You do minerals and waste for you guys under the service level agreement.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Good morning.
Yes, Chair?
Yes, Jane, I'm here as well. Jane?
Yes. Yeah, Kerry, right, thank you.
Yeah, you did. I did note you're struggling, yeah, but you're in. Lovely, thank you very much. That completes the roll call. Can I ask you to confirm that we are quorate for this meeting, Jane?
I'm just checking now. They said no, Vice Chair, yes, so it has to be over half.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, just about. Well, thank you very much for attending, everybody. And a warm welcome to Matt Nicholson, who's registered to speak. Good morning. And also to Matt Roberts, who's just come to observe. And also to Councillors Purcell and Reynolds, who do not normally sit on the planning committee, but have registered to come and give us their views on the business today. So a warm welcome to everybody. With the registered speaker, Mr. Nicholson, you will be given 5 minutes to speak by Jane, our Democratic Service Officer, and that she'll just give you a quick check at 1 minute to go. So is that okay with you?
Yes, that's fine, thank you.
Lovely. If you have any difficulties, do you know how to raise your hand at the meeting to sort of acknowledge that you wish to say something?
Yes, I think I've got that.
That's just for if you have any difficulties with IT or anything, that's all, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Lovely. Okay, then we'll proceed with the meeting. So I've done declarations of interest. I'll go to 2 minutes of the previous meeting to be found on pages 5 to 8. Will anybody please propose that they are a true record?
I move, Chair.
Who was that? Sorry, Councillor Hunt. Yes. Yes. Who's second, please?
Yeah, happy to second, Chair.
Lovely. Yeah. Okay, then noted that those are ratified. So I'll go back to the agenda. Just a second. Right. So then we'll go on to requests for site visits. At the moment, we've got a bit of a stop on site visits because of obvious reasons, and I haven't had any requests for today's items. So item 4 then, item 4 and item 5, I think officers will obviously go through each item, but they are to be taken there on the same site, but they are of course different items to be approved or not. So application P 2018/0512. I'm not going to read the whole item out because it is on your papers. So I will ask for Mr. Ball then to run the committee through this application, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. You can just let me know when you have the screen shared.
Yes, I can see it.
Right, thank you. So good morning, everyone. As the Chair's indicated, there are 2 items on the committee today for plan applications, which are P 2018-0512, which is in front of you there, which relates to Puddle Farm, and also 0511, which also relates to the bottom half of the site. It's a complex site insofar as normally you'd have one application that would deal with the whole area, but for different reasons over the course of the history of the site, permissions have been separated but conjoined effectively. So hence why you've got 2 different applications, which, as you can see from the description in front of you, they are quite detailed. But actually the issues in hand are relatively simple, and I'll seek to talk you through. As the report has stated on page 9, both of these applications have actually been the subject of a call-in request to the Welsh ministers, who has issued a holding direction, which the majority of members will be aware is just issued by the Welsh Government, and it precludes us from actually granting plan permission, but it doesn't stop us actually reporting the matter and gaining a resolution. Only should we resolve to grant plan permission, we would then need to advise the Welsh ministers that that is our resolution and await their response, which would either be to call the application in or to withdraw their holding direction, thus allowing us to proceed to a decision. So the application site itself, many of you will be aware, it's a historical landfill site at Puddle. It's in the northwestern part of Neath, Talbot, and it's close to or south of Cwmgors and Gwauncagowen, and to the northwest of Rhyd of Roe. And just this is in your report, but the actual site itself is all of these areas. Tip 871 is the area that it's related to the second application 0511, and the northern part relates to tip 890, which is the ongoing or the existing landfill operation. And 891, which is the site in the middle, is the one that's the historical landfill, which has been completed in the central section. The picture there probably gives the best view, really. This shows tip 891, and this shows the existing tip 890, which is currently being landfilled. And effectively, as you can see, this has been landfilled progressively, landfilled and restored as it's gone along, and you can see the existing face of the landfill taken at this point here. The application itself, before you, I say it's quite complex matters, but very in a simple terms, what it seeks to do is extend the lifetime of the operations for landfill up until the end of 2023. So a further three years and a couple of weeks from today's date, with an additional year then for the completion of the restoration of that site, taking operations as a whole up until 2024. As reported on page 12, the actual current permission for landfill tipping actually expired in towards the end of 2018, but the applications were submitted, and there have been ongoing discussions and negotiations related to the applications since that time, since when landfill operations have continued at the site following that expiry, but the authority has continued to monitor those operations, and effectively, given the fact that we've been considering the merits of these applications, it hasn't been considered to actually undertake any action in respect of the actual landfill operations itself, albeit I'll come to matters related to odour later in the report that's had a degree of interaction more recently. In terms of the previous consent, shown again on this picture here, effectively this area here, which I'm circling with my cursor, this area was going to be a landfill site in terms of what's known as cell 5, but this proposal effectively seeks to change that, so it's not going to have as much landfill coming in, and it's effectively going to be seeking to complete this area here. So the main thing really is it's extending the time limit up until the end of 2023. It's changing the actual amount of landfill coming in, and thus the final restoration profiles and landscape impacts are changing slightly because of this void area effectively isn't being filled. So it would be a different restoration profile being at the end of completion. The application also proposes amended phasing, landscaping, and generally tidying up all the conditions on I say what are quite complex application histories, to delete and to avoid duplication of other conditions, to make it tidier consent. Just, I won't go into it in many detail, but you'll note from pages 16 onwards that there's been quite a lot of representations received. Those have been including from Councillor Lynette Purcell and Anthony Richards from the Pontardawe ward, and also from Councillor Sonia Reynolds from the Gwauncagowen ward, and Lynette Purcell and Sonia Reynolds are both here to put forward their views on behalf of those two wards. The site is actually in Pontardawe, but the impact of the ward do actually extend, particularly in terms of the odour issues that we'll discuss later, onto Gwauncagowen. There's also been a number of local representations have been received on the application, in the region 19 representations, raising a number of issues, particularly in terms of the need for the site and associated issues, but particularly related to issues of strong odour from the site. The policy directive or the policy situation context is set out in a lot of detail, which I won't go into on pages 18 onwards, but generally it sets out the European directives, which have then fed into Planning Policy Wales, national legislation in terms of wellbeing of future generations, Planning Policy Wales, and particularly towards zero waste, which is the National Waste Strategy. And very much in a nutshell, what each of those documents seek to do is to be reducing the reliance on landfill, for reducing the amount of rubbish, quite clearly in terms of reducing and recycling, and effectively moving towards a phasing out of residual waste being moved to landfill. But what it does indicate as well is that even within that long-term framework, there is still a requirement for landfill in the short to medium term up to 2024, 2025. Because of that ever-decreasing role, we still need to consider applications such as this. And as page 22 indicates, there's currently an issue. We as an authority and as a region, there needs to be a landfill void, an ability for landfill to have up to around a 7-year or above figure. And the report indicates that at the last monitoring report for South West Wales, we are currently at 6.1, which is actually quite drastically reduced from the previous survey from 11.2 years, which is partly as a result of the expiry of the permission at Pwll Watkin, but also other issues in terms of increase in landfill in 2018 and other issues at other sites. So that's of relevance in terms of the principle, which I'll get to shortly. Just in terms of the local development plan, there's a number of different policies on page 23 onwards, but the most important ones are to note that policy SP19, the strategic policy, does require the authority to make provision for an integrated network of waste management facilities. And one of those is the continuation of the disposal of residual non-hazardous waste and inert waste at the current site, at Pwll Watkin landfill site. So therefore, this is an allocated site within the local development plan for landfill purposes. And that then, of course, is policy SC1, which is an outside settlements policy, which effectively allows things such as this in terms of waste management facilities that cannot be reasonably located elsewhere. So therefore, in terms of the main issues, they're set out on page 25. The first one in terms of policy principle and the need for the development. As I've indicated, the Welsh Government guidance effectively talks about the fact that there is a diminishing but still important role for landfill in the short to medium term up to 2024-2025, while other waste treatment infrastructure comes on steam. And within that context, it is important to understand that while this consent has expired, as I say, this is an allocated site for landfill to meet the needs in the local development plan period. The 7-year void capacity I just referred to earlier is identified in TAN 21 as the level at which there would be sufficient capacity within that region to meet future disposal needs, and therefore we should be seeking to maintain that level if possible. As the annual waste monitoring report is identified from early this year, March 2020, we're down at 6.1 years, and that therefore is kind of a trigger where the market would normally come forward with sites and solutions to deal with landfill need, and this therefore is an example of the market come forward with such a solution, albeit on an existing historical site that is seeking to extend its permission. Although we're not in a position at the moment, that the 5-year figure is just referred to also in the report, effectively that if we were to fall below 5 years, that becomes a much more significant issue at a regional level, because the region would then need to be identifying further landfill sites, which is obviously a tricky situation to be in when there are existing sites such as Pwll Watkin and others in the region, and actually only a very small window in terms of the next 4 or 5 years to because of the phasing out of the importance on landfill. So within that context, it is important to note that that ultimately the next monitoring report could potentially take us down close to or even below that 5-year trigger, and therefore these kind of sites are very important within the overall context of a need to provide landfill as a short to medium term solution. So what this scheme would actually do would actually allow for an additional permitted void capacity, and emphasis on the word permitted because while it's an existing site, it would with plan permission, it would come back into the fold for assessment as part of the monitoring report, and it would add approximately 1.1 years to that figure, and therefore return the void capacity at this moment to just over the 7-year figure. So that is an important figure to note, but in terms of need, because it would provide an appropriate, in our opinion, interim position to address the short-term needs of the region in the lead up to 2024-25, but without actually compromising, the long-term need for appropriate solutions, which would still seek to, push the treatment of residual waste up the waste hierarchy. So within that in place, we consider that providing appropriate controls has been put in place to address identified impacts arising from development. The need for development is something that should be given significant weight, as would its compliance with policies SP19 and generally with PPW and guidance in towards zero waste. So then moving on to the actual issues itself. Drainage and flooding. The site generally has operated in general conformity with its previous consents, but there have been some issues of concern through the course of this application that our drainage team, which Justin's here to answer any questions you may have, particularly regard to issues of surface water runoff, potential contamination from that, and particularly onto Barron Road, which is the road that runs between 890 and 891 and 871. But as the report identifies, subject to a number of different conditions that will require adequate and continuous monitoring of those matters in terms of surface water, is considered that long-term drainage of the site is acceptable, subject to those conditions being met. And on that basis, there would be no increase in the risk of pollution or unacceptable impact from drainage arising from the extension of time for landfill at the site. In terms of visual amenity, the presentation on the screen that you had yesterday just briefly seeks to show the site itself. As I talked about before, it's primarily the change is the fact that this area in the centre won't be filled anymore, and it will be a change in profile and a very slight change in terms of profile of tip 89 over top. But what it won't be doing, it won't be increasing the overall heights. So the images in terms of the viewpoints, it's difficult to see on the slides, I'm sure, but you may wish to screen in. But ultimately, you can see the site is at the top here, particularly, and you've got tip 871 over on the right hand side, and you've got the existing site over here. So you can see the face of the existing landfill here. So effectively, the existing completed 891 will come down, and then we'll come back up to 89 here. So a slightly different profile, as I say, because it won't be filling in the void that was previously proposed.
Okay, just to interrupt you just for a second.
Yes, of course, Chair.
Just to remind members that if they can't see, because on the screen that you've shared, it is quite small, but they will have had the presentation, so they can always go back to the presentation if they want to enlarge or look in more depth. Yeah,
I can also zoom in.
Yeah, it goes out of focus a little bit there.
Yeah, I don't know whether that works at all, but
that's fine.
If anyone wants me to focus on or try and do more, I can try and do that if there's any questions, by all means, Chair. I might be able to do it later in the questions as well by zooming in.
Members can do it on their devices. Yeah, okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, not a problem. You're the Chair. You're more important than me. So in terms of the visual amenity side of things, the report goes into those changes, and as I say, there are changes to the finished profiles that result from this scheme, but generally the conclusions of the report are that those would not actually have any greater impact on the area, notwithstanding the fact that they would be a different profile, and therefore wouldn't have any negative or adverse impact both on the countryside itself or in terms of the special landscape areas nearby. In terms of residential amenity, which are the main issues that are probably of concern related to the site, we first covered dust, and generally speaking, there's not considered to be a dust issue at the site. Generally, because as long as there's compliance with the approved scheme, which will continue to be conditioned, any issues that were to arise from dust as a consequence of works at the site could be appropriately controlled through those conditions and any necessary action if in the event of material breaches. Very similar situation for noise. Obviously, things would continue for another 3 years in terms of the operations for landfill and another year for restoration. So that while there'd be an extension of the time itself, generally speaking, the conditions that we've got, which will be reinforced as part of this consent, have proved adequate to ensure that noise doesn't have any significant adverse impacts. So therefore, again, there's no objection from that. Environmental health are satisfied in that respect as well. The main issue of concern that officers have had and the locals and local members have raised does relate to odour at the site, and I'm sure this will be one that we can have more discussion about, and we'll hear from both the local members, but we also have my environmental health colleague here to provide any assistance in that regard. So the need to ensure there isn't an adverse impact from odour has been highlighted by a lot of people, as I said, and that's notable because this time last year and it's a time of year when odour often can become a problem due to climatic conditions. There were objections and quite a lot of issues that needed investigation. And odour management at the site, because this is a permitted site, would normally be regulated by Natural Resources Wales. But last year, because of the number of issues raised, both Carmarthenshire as our mineral advisors, and Tom is here today as well, and environmental health team, which Kelvin and Leah are representing, did become involved because of the scale of those complaints. And actually, it led to the service by environmental health, quite unusually, of an abatement notice, which did require the applicant to undertake remedial measures to seek to reduce odour issues at the site. And the report talked about the different things that were undertaken there. And largely those issues were undertaken, and the odour issues were addressed. But in recent weeks, which does coincide with the same kind of time last year, I say with the climatic conditions, odour issues have arisen again, and therefore, you know, they are being investigated by Natural Resources Wales, and Environmental Health have been made aware of those issues as well, and will be looking into those further as a consequence. But while Environmental Health have expressed concern about the fact that odour issues are ongoing at the site, they are also very appreciative of the arguments that I've talked about in terms of the need for this facility and the need for continued provision of land at the site up until 2023. But obviously, it's also important because it's only, and emphasis on the word only, but it's only a further 3-year period. And within that context, what the previous consent had was a requirement to comply with an odour management plan. But what you'll see from the conditions attached, recommended to be attached to this this approval, which is conditions 21 to 23, we have drafted up a set of what we consider, to be a set of both new, robust and enforceable conditions, which are very rigid and robust, covering all matters to do with odour management. And both from a planning and environmental health and waste operatives perspective, we're more than satisfied that within the context of the need for the facility, that those conditions would provide a very clear and robust set of controls that would allow us to address any odour issues arising at the site. And the report at page 33 briefly details what they are. So the first one is they need to comply with their odour management plan, and that will be as it's currently approved, or as it will be amended following review under condition, the second condition on that screen, which is condition 22, which actually does require every 12 months effectively a review of their odour management plan to ensure that it remains fit for purpose and addresses all and any issues at the site. And that seeks to tie it also in with the fact that there's the odour management plan under the environmental permitting procedure as well. And then the third listed condition there also effectively gives us a further string to our enforcement bow, so to speak, which in the event of what we feel would be a justified complaint, we can actually, as a planning authority, request that the operator undertakes a full investigation into the causes of the odour and report and make any necessary amendments to their odour management plan or to the site operations under an agreed action plan. And it's a very tight, restricted condition, that one is. We don't have that at the moment, but this, these three conditions together, individually and cumulatively, will, in our submission, ensure that we have the most robust odour management possible at this site, which will balance with the fact that we consider there's a need to continue this site for the next 3 years. So having regard to those controls, but also additional regulatory mechanisms through the environmental permitting process, we are satisfied that the proposal would accord with planning policy and therefore be acceptable. Other matters in terms of the report talks about ecology and biodiversity, and very much in summary, we've had some additional information submitted as part of the application, and both NRW and our ecologists are happy, subject to conditions being imposed on the application, that the proposed restoration aftercare will deliver a satisfactory restoration of the site, and therefore it will comply with the relevant policies in the local development plan. Similarly, in terms of highways, this scheme doesn't have any materially greater impact than the approved scheme, and indeed, as the report says, the number of movements actually to and from the site has been substantially less than is actually approved. The only main issues really related to the surface water issues on the road related to drainage, and again, as I said, those are covered by the relevant conditions under surface water drainage, and subject to those, we're satisfied there'd be no adverse highway impacts from the development either. And finally, Chair, in terms of other matters which are addressed on the top of page 36, local ward members have asked what would happen should this application be refused. So what, and I would also hasten to add that Councillor Woolcock asked a supplementary question which is covered in the amendment sheet, that also asked the question about a situation where we could potentially serve a stop notice. So what the report and the amendment sheet effectively says is, should permission be refused by members today, the applicant would obviously have a right of appeal against such a refusal. At that time, we as an authority would then need to consider whether it were expedient to take any action against the operator in continuing to undertake any operations at the site, should they choose to do so. Now, Councillor Walker asked whether we would, in the event of an appeal, whether it would be appropriate to serve a stop notice to prevent any such work going on. And what the amendment sheet comments does say is, yes, we could serve a stop notice. It's always part of the enforcement armoury, so to speak, but that can only be served alongside an enforcement notice. An enforcement action on a site such as this is undoubtedly very, very complex, and it's not something that I have ever been involved in, and I think it would need very considerable, careful consideration as to how we might do that. So what the report says effectively is we would primarily we would engage with the operator in the event that members were refusing the application, which obviously the recommendation is to approve. But if members were to go against officer's recommendation, we would engage with the operator first to identify effectively what actions they would take and whether they would proceed to effectively look to formulate an alternative restoration plan based upon no further waste being imported, and therefore we'd implement the conditions on the early consent to get that restoration scheme imposed, or if they chose to appeal, whether they would be proceeding to continue landfilling, because if they did, we would then need to consider, and I think the best way to do it would be for officers to bring back a further report to planning committee identifying the issues involved and what action would be appropriate, which could, should it be necessary, could consider an enforcement notice and a stop notice. But I say, because of the complexities associated with it and the need to prepare plans relating to very different finished profiles, because no more landfill would be coming in, it is very complex, both in terms of landscape stuff, but also all manner of technical issues to do with drainage and leachate management and gas wells, which I wouldn't profess to be an expert in any respect. But luckily I have people who are. So ultimately, in a situation where we feel as officers that there is a need for this facility because of the overall void space, it is needing, refusing this would take the overall void space below the required threshold. We as officers at this moment feel it's appropriate to grant plan permission for this with the robust conditions in place. However, should members feel otherwise, ultimately we engage with members with the operator, and I would recommend we'd come back with a further report on such matters. But as the conclusion states, we're satisfied that there is a need for the facility. All the impacts are and can be addressed through condition, Chair. So the recommendation on page 37 is to approve, subject to obviously the Welsh Ministers first withdrawing their holding direction. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Ball. It's a very complex issue and a very finely balanced juggling act to meet the needs of somewhere to deposit our waste that we are still receiving, and also to calm and give the residents as best a quality of life as they can possibly have. So that's the very difficult decision we have here today. Officers recommending approval on this. So how I'm going to manage the speakers, I'm going to call Matt Nicholson first, as I normally do with members of the public or outside of the council, so to speak. Then I will call the two local members who are not members of the planning committee, Councillor Purcell and Councillor Reynolds. And then, because he submitted his question in advance, I will call on Councillor Woolcock to go through his question, and then I will open it up to committee. So that's the order that I'm going to do this in. So first of all, Mr. Matt Nicholson, representing the site operator, you will now have 5 minutes to address committee, and I will leave you in the hands of Jane to tell you how much time you have left. Jane, would you start the clock whenever Matt Nicholson is ready?
Yes, Chair. So if Mr. Nichols wants to start, I will remind you when there's 1 minute left, Mr. Nicholson.
Okay, all right. Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Good morning, members.
Just a second, Mr. Nicholson. I'm so sorry to interrupt you straight away, but I can see that Councillor Purcell is leaning in and having difficulty hearing. Is there anything we can do to assist you, Councillor Purcell?
IT have given me a lovely little gadget.
Right.
I'll hold it right next to my ear, and I should be okay.
Okay, I just could see you.
Yeah,
sort of straining.
It was muffled.
It is quite muffled, Matt. So I don't know whether you've got your microphone close enough to your mouth. It was quite muffled.
Yeah.
Okay, I shall lean in a bit if that helps.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. So Jane, if you could just start the clock again, then please.
Yes, by all means.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, hopefully you can all hear me. But so yes, my name is Matt Nicholson, and I'm the estates manager for FCC Environment, who operate the site. And I'm here to speak in support of our Section 73 application, which has been submitted to extend the operational life of Watkin landfill. As you've just heard from the presentation and as set out in the committee report, the site is an existing operational landfill. It was developed within a former colliery workings and provides a strategically important disposal point for existing waste streams. And as you heard in the presentation, it provides a valuable contribution to the region's available void space in the short term. In addition to its planning consent, the site is also operated in accordance with an environmental permit, and the site is progressively capped and restored as the infilling is completed, and we are now coming toward the end of the infilling and therefore the final completion of the site. It was just that a short extension of time was required to complete that. The operational practices that we use on the site are in line with our environmental permit, and they seek to minimise amenity impacts by keeping the operational working area as small as is practically possible. And also we cap areas immediately upon reaching their final levels, and also we are maintaining active gas extraction across the site. The application that's been submitted, which is seeking the short extension of operational life to the end of 2023, is based upon forecasted waste inputs and an overall reduction in the void from that was previously consented. So the revised final contours actually represent a minimum volume to produce a suitable final landform that facilitates sustainable drainage and stability throughout the closure and aftercare phase. To not grant planning permission would require the immediate closure of the site, which would result in the loss of an important disposal point for existing waste streams, and consequently it would also result in an unsuitable landform that would present problems for sustainable surface water management and slope stability. This in turn would cause issues for other environmental control systems for leachate and landfill gas, and therefore as an approach is not ideal, and hence we'd put forward the revision to the contours for a short period of time to bring the site to a satisfactory position to close. We obviously welcome the officer's recommendation for approval, and we support the recommendation that planning permission is granted subject to the conditions as set out. I'm quite happy to answer any questions that the committee might have regarding the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. We don't normally come back to speakers with questions. Normally it's just the 5 minutes. You're perfectly welcome to stay, obviously, for the rest of the meeting, but your participation is at an end, so to speak, and we will just take on board. If any member hasn't heard anything, that is a different matter. You may ask for clarification, but not to go on to a separate question, that type of thing. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Nicholson, for attending our planning committee this morning. So having heard the speaker for the site, we're now going to go on to the speakers that have asked to come, who are members of council. So I'm going to call on Councillor Purcell first, and then Councillor Sonia Reynolds to speak afterwards. I do not put the clock on members of council. However, please be minded, it's around 5 minutes, okay? So Councillor Purcell, please.
Thank you very much for that, Chair. Obviously, there's several points that I want to make on behalf of the community, but is it okay for me to ask a question first and then go on to say what I want to say about the community?
It's not usual, Councillor Purcell. If you could leave your questions until after your statement, I'll allow you to come back to ask questions. That's no problem.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just read what I've prepared, which contains a question, and then perhaps Steve can come back and answer the question at the end. So the question I wanted to ask was, it says the permission expired in September 2018. And when Steve first began speaking, he said that despite that, the authority had continued to monitor. But then later on in his presentation, he said the conditions will enable the site to come back into monitoring. So I really need clarification of that on behalf of the community later on after I finished.
Yeah, we'll do that.
And I also wondered what the legal situation was if they had been functioning without planning permission, having expired in 2018. However, the main points I wanted to make is really to do with the confidence that the community has in the council and in NRW Wales based on historical performance of this site. So there are many references throughout the report to concerns raised by highways, for example, on page 16, biodiversity, 17, etc. However, we are to be assured by officers that these issues could be satisfactorily resolved by the application of conditions. But we, as the community, would need to have confidence that these conditions would be rigorously enforced and, crucially, would work. So looking at that, I'm just considering the management to date of odour. The report refers to policies, including UK law, Waste Regulations 2011, which says waste management should be undertaken without causing nuisance through odour. And you report that an odour management plan has been in place since January 2020. Now, that is absolutely crucial, that fact, because despite that odour management plan being in place, you report that odour has been the repeated source of complaint from residents. You also report that despite the existence of this odour management plan, an abatement notice had to be served by Environmental Health, although you don't give us a date. So the first crucial question my community would like to ask, how effective has that odour management plan been? Bearing in mind that although you've referred to historic complaints, there was a complaint from my resident received on November the 23rd, 2020, logged with the council, and a further incident reported on November 26th, logged with NRW and with the council. In both cases, the resident has received no information as to what action will be taken by either authority. And I'm quite sure Councillor Reynolds will clarify a lot more about this as the impact on her community. So what I'm basically saying is we've had an odour management plan in existence since January 2020, and yet we have these repeated complaints now logged as advised, no response from anybody as to what is going to happen. Now, on page 32, you report that Environmental Health are concerned about the odour, but would be happy if new enforceable conditions were applied. So the next crucial question I would want to ask is, can you explain how those conditions outlined on page 33 differ from what has been happening to date? I'm particularly concerned that condition 21, page 42 states, all operations shall be carried out in full accordance with the odour management plan dated January 2020. In relation to which plan, you state that planning could take formal action should odour issues, and I'm quoting, not be handled expeditiously. I looked that up, it means swiftly. So planning could take formal action should odour issues not be handled expeditiously, and yet my resident has no response from his complaints on November the 23rd or the 26th. And despite the existence of this plan since January 2020, there was still a need to serve an enforcement notice. And the fact that my residents report suffering up until November the 26th. So what really worries us is you're referring to this odour management plan as being the way all of this is going to be dealt with, and yet it's been in existence since January 2020, and all these problems have still occurred. So I would submit with great tact and respect that this isn't working. So how could we as a community have the necessary confidence to support this application? I think, to be quite honest, we'd be more inclined to support it if the odour management plan hadn't been in existence. But because it has, and it obviously hasn't been working, I think the community has every right to be very worried. So now we come on to the question that Councillor Richards and I asked about what would happen if permission was refused. Before reading the detailed history of this site, for which we're very grateful, as included in the officer's report, we were hoping as ward councillors to be sufficiently reassured as to be able to support approval of the application. However, we would have hoped to have had, on page 36, when you answer our question, some assurances that it was necessary to support this application in order to protect the well-being of our residents, because that's the bottom line as far as I'm concerned. I need to support the well-being of my residents. Convince me, and therefore convince the committee, that it's necessary to support this application in order to protect the well-being of the residents of my community and Neath, Talbot, and I would be convinced. But no, on page 36, as far as I can understand, not being an expert, the report simply states how the negative implications of refusing this application would affect the South West Wales region and this council. However, I'm not speaking today as a member of council or by default responsible for the South West Wales region. I'm speaking as the councillor for Rhyd of Roe and Pontyddar. It is galling, and I'm sure the members of the public who are requesting to watch this meeting after this is concluded, it is galling to the nth degree to have somebody say, well, you put up with it so far, now we're just going to extend it just for a short time, just another few years, despite the fact they were told this was going to end. And I want you just to understand that if I have an email from a resident on November the 23rd that says that his 4-year-old child is awake in the night saying, Daddy, I feel sick, I can't sleep, then it is absolutely beholden on me, and I beg the committee to support me on this, to say that from our residents' past experience and up until this very month, we are not concerned, we're not convinced that this is going to be working well, and we ask the committee to support our community and to consider refusal of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purcell. I'm minded that Councillor Reynolds would probably have maybe similar questions or statements. So I'm going to go to Councillor Reynolds now, and then we'll deal with all the questions from the expert officers that we have here. I've noted the questions down, and I dare say you have as well, so we won't miss any of them. Councillor Reynolds, could you also address committee now then, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm not going to repeat in detail what Councillor Purcell has just said, because some of those questions are questions that I would also like to hear the answers to. So I'm not going to go over the same ground in detail. However, the tip is not in my ward, but we're closest to the tip. And the prevailing winds and weather conditions mean that the communities of GCG, Cumgorse, and further along the valley, occasionally, and I know my colleague is here from Lower Brenhaman, but up to Lower Brenhaman and into Tygwaith, where I live just over the border from my ward, you know, we do smell it there. So it is impacting much more widely in the communities that I serve. The report clearly identifies all the policies and laws which relate to health and well-being of residents, but as Councillor Purcell says, doesn't actually indicate how the extension to this tip will impact on those residents in terms of their health and well-being. It just talks about managing the odour. The whole focus is an economic one, but it is short-term. Or it's a focus on law relating to how the waste is delivered. Now, it is short term. Our community has for many years been the valley of the tip and the pit. We are finally beginning to get rid of the East Pit site and have restoration there, and the possibility of a country park, and the possibility of developing one of the few industries that's available to us, and that's hospitality and tourism and active leisure. This tip impacts directly on the ability of the community to develop those services and to move forward with a real economic development in its area. We are the gateway to the Black Mountain, but no one wants to stop in our community because we have a landfill tip and there is an odour. So my focus is to give a flavour of the views and feelings of local residents and to put their case for something which has existed in our community for over 40 years. And the odour has been there throughout. It is not a recent phenomenon, as has been indicated. There were times in the past, at one point during the foot and mouth outbreak, there were real issues with this landfill related to that outbreak and what was buried at the site. The waste that moves there has been changed now, but this is a long-term issue. It comes and goes. And yes, it is seasonal, but it's still, you know, ongoing throughout the year. We had complaints in May of this year. So, you know, it's not something which is just limited to certain times of the year, and it hasn't gone away. It's been something I've been aware of as a local resident ever since I moved to the area in the early 80s. And since I've been a councillor in 2017, it has formed a regular part of my local work. I would say I probably, throughout my period of time in office as a councillor, have received at least one complaint per month about Pwllheli odour and other issues, droppage on the highway from the lorries, etc. One of my residents wrote to me in the last couple of days. He stated, I can't attend the planning committee. I've got to work. However, I live 2 miles away from the site in GCG, and on times I can't bear the smell. Frequent phone calls to complain and endless case numbers are given, yet an extension is actually being considered, putting the health and safety of our community at even greater risk. Another resident, and I've picked the ones who use language that is appropriate to the committee as opposed to the much more abusive ones that I can receive, to be quite honest, and the ones that are much more vocal about the council, because there is a lack of understanding of the role between the council and NRW. But this one says, I live a mile away. We've all had enough of this smell. As I've said, it's my home. We as residents have complained so many times, had our reference numbers. We've had the newspapers here. The Welsh TV News did a piece last year, and we still have nothing done. Don't tell me the local authority care for residents of Cwmgors and GCG. The surrounding areas are still, nothing is being done. Just another extension again and no care for us. So there are, it is a real focus of concern in our community, and both of those were received in this last week. So, as I said, not a local issue. The severe odour really started to impact in October 2019. So the recent issues were highlighted in 2019. This worked from October through to December. High levels of complaints. NRW at the liaison committee made great efforts to suggest that this was coming from other sources, that it was possibly, as they thought it possibly had been in the past, from muck spreading locally, or in one case, the suggestion was tyre burning. We had reports from Garnant, and my fellow councillor, Councillor Kevin Madge in Carmarthenshire, made a formal complaint. And that's 2.5 to 3 miles north of the site. There were also complaints from across the rest of the community. Walkers on the Barron Mountain, on the Garth Mountain and Gwyrid Mountains also contacted me to complain. Drivers on the A474 sent in complaints. On the 5th of December, the headmaster of GCG Primary School rang me. His parents were complaining at the doorway, and the children were eating their lunch or eating their meals in the dining hall with the smell in the dining hall of the school. It is not just a minor problem. This is a major problem. And lack of action from Natural Resources Wales and local people means that they've lost faith in the system. So people actually stopped reporting to NRW because what they discovered was that their reports weren't being recorded. I had to instruct residents to make sure they asked for an incident number and were clear about the requirement to have this noted. And eventually I've had to ask that they email complaints in so that there is a clear evidence trail, and that has been happening more in this last month. When our local member of Neath, Jeremy Miles, contacted NRW in response to a question from myself, the CEO of NRW came back at the beginning of November and said they had received no complaints. Now, that goes against everything that residents were saying to me about what was happening. I can only praise our environmental health department, who moved in around the end of November and early December, who travelled round our community to talk to residents and put their minds at rest that the odour was not harmful. It was disgusting, but it wasn't harmful, and who did some excellent work on the site to identify the issues that that weren't being identified and dealt with by NRW. They discovered, and it was reported directly at and it's minuted in the 30th of February liaison committee, that failures to cover cells when not actively working were considered to be part of the problem. And part of this was down to the fact that the actual number of lorries coming to the site were 20 to 25 per day, not the 56 noted in the report. And that the drop in waste coming to the site meant that the areas weren't being capped or filled. And therefore, there was a more chance of odour and more problems with the site. They identified that the leachate had increased quite dramatically, almost doubled at one point. And the lagoons and other areas were having to be pumped and more tankers used. And they identified the issues that gave rise to 7 new gas wells drilled and finalised late in December 2019. That resulted in some 200 cubic metres of additional gas being collected from the site. And when I asked the question as to what would have been happening to that gas before, I was told it was escaping into the atmosphere. Now, I would like to know from our people and from the site, and I asked the question of site officers at the liaison committee, what the implications are for that gas being released and why it wasn't dealt with earlier. This has been going on throughout 2020. As I said, there were complaints in May. Complaints rose again in October this year as the weather came down and the smells were held in. NRW unresponsive. We are looking at a situation where maybe this council would not even consider an extension because of the way the planning report reads, if it wasn't for the TAN 21 requirements of void. That requirement, I would postulate, is already out of date. It has been surpassed by the recycling and by the activity going on. So our council does not use that site. We do not use landfill at all. Recycling has reached that point. It is clear, and from my discussions with Assembly members, that TAN 21 hasn't been updated that recently. So, as I say, I would postulate that is out of date. It's a clear indication that the slow rate of fill may align with odour, and that aligns with the fact that there isn't enough waste. There is an indication given at the liaison committee that there's been a decrease of staff at the site. And I asked at that point, and would continue to ask, if that was money saving and what impact that had on operational standards and how that was impacting on the site.
So,
because the site is becoming less viable.
Are you coming closely to the end? Because I know I don't put time limits on councillors, but I do think you've overstepped the 5 minutes, definitely.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
It is important, and it does pertain to the planning.
Yes.
And we are, whilst we don't need to look from a parochial perspective, we know this site is in competition with other sites. That was also stated at the liaison committee. And the other two sites, one is looking at its viability, and I would suggest this site has possible issues with viability given the decrease in waste, and that if there is a review of the Tir John site in 2022, does that mean that they might go and leave us with a further extension at this site needed in order to maintain the void? So I would say quite clearly that we need to benefit from refusing planning permission on this site, to our valley not being the valley with the tip and the pit, and moving forward from that. So I'd like this planning committee to consider a refusal to the application and to consider the well-being of residents and the future economy of the Upper Ammon Valley. And I'd also, if that is not possible because of the considerations of the void, I'd like to think that planning committee would consider that, having worked within the constraints that planning must operate, because of the long-term odour issues and the very real impact on residents, that they would prevent or put in place some sort of condition or a requirement that this would be the final ever planning application for waste tipping at this site, and that there would be no consideration of any further extension, and that the valley can move on to look at the restoration plans put forward by the company that could actually benefit the residents, and are talking about cycle paths which would meet the needs as are being already forwarded to our active travel plan that the residents would want, and also further tourism. Thank you.
Yep. OK, Councillor Reynolds, thank you very much. And Councillor Purcell, both been very eloquent as to your residents' views to you. I'm going to go to officers now, because both of you have raised questions that I do believe need the detailed answers of our experts. So I'm going to call the odour management plan was raised by Councillor Purcell. Steve, who have we got to answer that?
Well, I'll start first, and I'll try and go through some of the matters, and then I imagine I'll probably need some additional input from both Tom Boothroyd at Command and Shitter on some of the technical points, and from Kelvin in terms of the environmental health side of things. So, I will do my best, Councillor Purcell and Reynolds, to cover the issues you've raised. You know, you both eloquently raised the issues of concern on behalf of the community, and you know, I'm more than aware of the issues you've raised. But as I say, you put them forward very, very eloquently, and I certainly understand the need, particularly as Lynette, you've said, in terms of the issues of confidence, and I absolutely get that. So I'll try and cover the bits I've written down, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, we'll move on. Yeah.
Yeah. So Councillor Purcell, I mean, you talked start with in terms of the fact that it expired in 2018. And then you asked about the back into monitoring question. That might have just been, I can't remember my exact words, and it may have just been not necessarily using the right words. I think the most important thing really is, yes, it did expire in 2018, but it has been monitored since then, including, as you've both referred to, in terms of the site liaison committee, for example, earlier this year. I think the point of bringing it back into control is more about, because it doesn't have a planning permission at the moment, all we can really do at the moment would be to take formal enforcement action through an enforcement notice, and or in addition to that as a stop notice, as Councillor Woolcock has asked. But what granting plan permission, as is recommended by officers, would do is bring it back into full control, because it would have a new valid plan permission where we would have a set of, particularly with regard to odour, but all conditions, a set of robust and enforceable conditions. That is really important, because when you breach a planning condition, we can serve a breach of condition notice on an operator, which therefore requires them to comply with that condition. And if they fail to do so, then it becomes an offence for which they can be prosecuted. There is no right of appeal against a breach of condition notice, where there is an appeal against an enforcement notice, which can take some considerable time to deal with through an appeal process. So that's what I meant in terms of bringing it back into control effectively. Permeating through both of your views is very much the issue about confidence, and I do get the fact that the concerns stem from perhaps an overlap insofar as the report emphasises, and Kelvin will no doubt comment as well, as this is a site that is largely to be regulated by Natural Resources Wales, and it's quite clear from what both of you have said is that your confidence in Natural Resources Wales to robustly enforce the permitting procedures, you know, is you have no confidence in NRW completely. I get that, and Councillor Reynolds, when you talk about the CEO having written to Jerry Marr saying there's been no complaints, I'm shocked, if I'm honest, that a letter could go out from CEO saying that when it's quite blatantly clear that there have been complaints, and I'm very surprised that NRW would say that, because we all know that those complaints have been made to NRW and at times through to us as well, and most notably this time last year when we, and I say we as an authority, Environmental Health, did do the work you said, Councillor Reynolds, and I'm very pleased that you talked about, you know, you've given praise to effectively Kelvin's team in terms of the work they did, because they are a very good set of officers, and they're operating, you know, now especially in incredibly challenging circumstances, but they are still very strong in their investigation of these matters when they feel that there is in this case an odour issue that did result in action being taken. Not necessarily NRW would have liked us doing that, I hasten to add, but it was felt at that time it was necessary and appropriate for this authority to take that action. And I think that is really important to say in terms of how I see it as a planning officer recommending plan permission on this application with this set of conditions, because the set of new conditions, they are very different to what was before. So going back to Councillor Purcell, you kind of asked the question, you know, how effective has it been, and more specifically, how do these conditions differ? The most important thing is effectively on the old consent that has since expired, it effectively required them to comply with the odour management plan. although that was an older version of an odour management plan, not the newer version of an odour management plan, which is under the permitting procedure that NRW require. And therefore there was a disconnect in that respect. And because the consent has expired, we couldn't serve a breach of condition notice on failure to comply with that odour management plan because there was no longer that consent to enforce against. So the reasons these differ is one is the first condition, condition 21, that says comply with the odour management plan. It also requires them to comply with the new version of the odour management plan, which is the one that's been approved by NRW as well, but also to comply with any future versions of that odour management plan that would be approved under condition 22, which requires that OMP, sorry for acronyms, to be updated every 12 months to reflect the full understanding of the issues at the site, how it's operating, any issues that have risen, any complaints, how they've investigated them, all those kind of things. And it is important because it then is a continuous, regular review of that management plan that gives us the ability to then A, get it updated, and B, enforce against that most up-to-date operational management odour management plan. What the conditions also do, excuse me for looking on the side, it also effectively requires them to respond. So for example, condition 23 requires them within a week, which is a very short time scale, to respond. If we feel that there is a justified complaint, we can actually, as a planning authority, and this doesn't necessarily even involve environmental health to start with, we as a planning authority can write straight away to an operator to say, condition 23 requires the following, you do it now. You've got a week effectively to deal with that, and it's very detailed in terms of what it needs to do. If they fail to do that, then we can take action, but it actually also includes an extra, both condition 22 and 23 include an extra robust enforcement that effectively says if they fail to do that, operation shall cease until such time as they have implemented what's necessary in terms of the action management plan or revised the odour management plan. Those conditions are very robust. They are, they're significantly different to anything that's been on this site before. And when you take the fact that this is a planning set of conditions, normally we wouldn't seek to duplicate conditions or controls that are elsewhere, that put elsewhere. You shouldn't really duplicate regulatory regimes. But in this case, we feel it is absolutely essential to do so because it gives us as a local planning authority the ability to robustly enforce these conditions, both through service of notices if necessary, through seeking to require them to cease operations if they fail to do so, and again if they fail even further to do that, to take prosecution action as well. We as an authority will do that. That will be in consultation and liaison with our environmental health colleagues, because effectively when reports and responses are received, they would come to us as a local authority, not to Natural Resources Wales, and Kelvin's team would then review those. And that's why I'm really pleased, Councillor Reynolds, that you've effectively demonstrated, or I think that you've effectively said that you have faith in our environmental health colleagues to investigate robustly these matters, but you certainly don't in NRW. Now, in this case, this would be Kelvin's team that would be reviewing all that information in the event of complaints coming in liaison with Tom and Hugh's team at Carmarthenshire, our minerals advisors as well. And on that basis, that's why we feel that the recommendation to approve is the right one, because while you said that we hadn't necessarily considered kind of in the responses that we were approving this to protect the residents, and I do apologise perhaps if that didn't come across clearly in the conclusions, because actually that has very much been at the top of our list in terms of trying to control the impacts to ensure that we are protecting the amenity residents. And don't get me wrong, your view, and I understand it, is the best way to protect the amenity residents is not have a landfill, and I get that, and that is a decision that needs to be made today in assessing this in the round. But from an officer perspective, we can't just take a view that says, let's just get rid of it because it may have issues. We have to put it in around and say, well, there is a need for this facility in the short to medium term, up to the end of 2023 as being proposed, for landfill capacity as part of the overarching national waste strategy and the waste handling in the region. And that's why we feel that this is the right balance, the robust, enforceable set of conditions that would be both planning and environmental health led. Natural Resources Wales would still have their own controls, but let's face it, we would largely be taking the lead on these conditions as far as I'm concerned now, because you've demonstrated in your submissions that you don't trust NRW. We would still be telling them what we're doing, and they may not like what we're doing, but we'll be telling what we're doing. We'll be trying to do it in a coordinated fashion with them if issues arise. But we do feel that this is the right solution, which balances the need for the facility with the need to protect the residents in that short to medium term. Excuse me. Just in terms of other matters raised, you talk about, Councillor Reynolds, about TAN 21 being out of date, and the fact that MPT, we don't use Pwllheli anymore and the like. And I do get that, but it is the current policy document. It hasn't been withdrawn. It hasn't been amended. It is, we are statutorily required to have regard to TAN 21, Plan Policy Wales, and towards zero waste in terms of the National Waste Strategy. That is the policy context we have to have regard to. And on top of that, you've got a local development plan that allocates this site for provision of landfill for the plan period. So within that policy context, while I understand the point you're making, that is the context we need to make this decision against. And finally, you've also talked about, you know, if it wouldn't be possible to refuse, if members were minded to agree with officers, can this be the final ever proposal? You know, I understand where you're coming from there, because I know the same thing has been said previously for East Pitt, and that did rumble on a number of times. We are towards the end of that process as you talk in East Pitt. I appreciate your concerns about this being the valley of the landfill and the pit. We can't say as officers that we will not consider anything in the future, because we, as an authority, we cannot refuse to accept any application on anything, because we can't do that. However, I'm pretty confident when I can say that this takes to the end of 2023. It is proposing actually a reduction in landfill at this site. When they didn't need to do that, they could have sought to extend the consent with the larger capacity that it previously had. And I think when we'd be getting towards the end of 2023, we'd be in a much different situation. And I'm fairly confident to say we would be highly unlikely to be supporting extensions beyond that date, having regard to towards zero waste. So that's my view as a planner. I've got a hand and some nodding from Tom at Carmarthenshire, who perhaps can come in from a waste perspective. Thomas, yes, and then perhaps after Tom has spoken, perhaps Kelvin can come in and perhaps try and reinforce my confidence that I have in them in terms of enforcing these robust set of conditions. So perhaps Thomas first. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Ball. Yeah, I'd love to come to Thomas next. I do sense a sense. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm being supplied. I do sense a sense of frustration from our officers within the council regarding NRW, and I'm going to call on Thomas now, Thomas Boothroyd, to enlighten committee anything that you wish, you think that would strengthen the argument here. Thank you, Thomas.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors. Just to reiterate Steve's point, what he was saying about the odour management plan as well, really, because whilst we had an odour management plan when permission was granted in 2005, the actual plan itself was quite flawed, really, and it didn't really give much of a stick, shall we say, for the authority in terms of enforcement. The actual odour management plan itself was on as an appendix to the decision notice. It was 2 pages long. I don't know if members have been able to view the odour management plan as it is now, but it's obviously a much more thorough and more detailed affair. That obviously, if that is conditioned as it is advised to be conditioned in the recommendation, and that does actually, that does provide the authority with a lot more oomph behind, any enforcement action that may need to be taken should a breach of condition occur. That is, a thoroughly detailed, and proper odour management plan, as it should be, because that, that was what they've submitted for the environmental permit. So obviously NRW require that. As you've touched on, obviously there's a lack of confidence with NRW actually, shall we say, enforcing the things that are in that odour management plan. As Steve has said, the conditions that we've got on the recommendation as it is actually returns, some of that power back to the planning authority then, and we've obviously got that more detailed odour management plan along with any reviews that do need to be undertaken. So going forward, if it does need to be reviewed, that will occur, and the conditions, as Steve has said, will require that of the authority, so we don't necessarily have to play second fiddle to NRW. I've been to various technical working parties at the site where NRW, that they do go to those, so they are present at the site and should be aware of any issues when they are mentioned. What I would say is that moving forward, I think obviously we need to speak to Kelvin about this, but obviously Kelvin can become more involved in those technical working party groups moving forward, so we can have a more active involvement, in terms of that is what it is to discuss technical issues such as drilling wells, or if there have been issues, or if there are leachate issues, they are discussed at those technical working parties. But I think obviously, like I say, moving forward, Kelvin's involvement in those would obviously be beneficial and joint with the odour management plan, and those suggested conditions would help to perhaps even identify future issues as well as deal with any past.
I think we might have just
yes, I think we've lost Thomas for
lost Tom. Unfortunately, Tom, it being in Carmarthenshire is stuck out in the back of beyond sometimes, so he does occasionally have technical problems. So I think we
back to Kelvin then, because
I was just going to
Thomas
say
may be able to come back to us. So I'd love to hear from Kelvin and or Leah, because Councillor Purcell has said something regarding safety, and obviously that is paramount for our residents. So would you be able to, oh, he's waiting in the lobby, Jane.
Coming back.
Yeah. I'll just explain that Thomas, had you more or less come to an end, or would you like to continue?
No,
with what you were trying to say?
I just wanted to pick up on a point as well. I think it was Councillor Purcell made about the monitoring. I just wanted to clarify that as part of the minerals and waste permissions, we do actually carry out routine monitoring site visits, and they are carried out and that's something that we carry out probably 4 times a year. If issues do occur, we can carry out that more times a year. I hasten to say, I think, if it hadn't been for this COVID thing, we would have been out there more often. These visits are also chargeable. We charge the operator £330 every time we visit the site. So it's obviously in the best interest of the operator not to incur more site visits. We did carry out site visits in September, June and 9th of December in 2019. It would have been due a site visit in February, March time. But obviously that didn't occur for various reasons, mostly COVID. Again, this is something I think potentially if the environmental health team have the staff and the time for that, that's something again that we could carry out, as a joint approach, not only the technical working parties, but also with the monitoring visits where we actually do a walkover of the site. We go out in their Land Rover, whatever, when we go to various different points on the site, we actually do a walkover of the landfill. Again, this could be something where, going forward, if permission were to be granted, this would be something that we could do at a joint approach, and I think that would be, beneficial in terms of, identifying potential issues or coming up with solutions for issues that have already occurred. And that's all I want to say at the moment.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Thomas. I'm sorry we lost you temporarily.
That's okay.
That's okay. These things happen with remote meetings.
Yeah,
I'm going to come. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to come back to Kelvin now, for our environmental health officer in Neath, Talbot, and ask you to give us any sort of comfort that you can to members that this is indeed a different situation from what has happened before, because I think both councillors there and possibly others who haven't even had a chance yet may wish to emphasise. So Calvin, can you tell us that this is going to be different?
I think that's quite a difficult question to sort of answer, and a difficult position to put this environmental health into. But what I think would be helpful is to see what has changed since last year and since my team's involvement with the complaints.
Apologies if I put you on the spot there.
No, that's quite okay. I think we've got to be mindful here. The regulatory function for that site rests with Natural Resources Wales under the environmental permitting scheme, and that is a statutory function. And Environment Health have difficulties taking legal action, statutory action under the Environment Protection Act because that regime is in place. And there is a sort of statutory guidance out there which says you shouldn't duplicate that on enforcement action regarding the Environmental Protection Act for nuisance and the environmental permitting regime for where there's conditions attached to sites which should prevent order becoming a problem. And I think what sort of Thomas and Steve have sort of identified here, that there was a difference between what was on the planning permission and what Natural Resources Wales had in place. So with their conditions, because the order management plan is key to those controls. So the order management plan that we've seen for this planning application is something which I understand has been in place for a while, but with Natural Resources Wales, although it's been updated in 2020 following submission to this for this application. So, and I think for what Thomas was saying, the challenges that the planning authority had with taking any action regarding the previous order management plan for planning purposes, I think that's been sort of covered. So it is a complicated enforcement position for the site, and I know I'm grateful for the comments for environment health, and I'll pass that feedback to the staff. And I think some of the recent complaints was mentioned that environment health haven't contacted some of the complainants. I do know that we have contacted everybody that's come through to us, and we've referred them to Natural Resources Wales. So I think this is part of the challenge for me, is really how to manage complaints coming in, because effectively you've got three bodies here that are trying to sort of regulate the same thing at the site, or try and have an involvement in the site. So you've got the Planning Authority, you've got Natural Resources Wales, and then people normally come to Environment Health because they think order and all that comes to Environment Health, and they don't understand the split with enforcement responsibilities, which they wouldn't. And it's the challenges we have at other sites, for example, Tartar, and so we got same issues there. So what I would sort of propose, if the committee today was mindful of granting the extension, and set up some sort of enforcement memorandum or some sort of procedure whereby we can formalise the complaints procedure for this site in relation to order. So I think that would be sort of definitely needed. I think the other sort of question then, I think was in my sort of area, what that was the enforcement part of it. Hopefully I've answered the difficulties that we have as an authority, as an environment health authority. But then the other question then I think was about whether the order management plan would resolve the problem.
Yes.
And I can't give any assurances on that. I think you've already touched upon the issue that if you wanted to resolve the problem there, then the only way to 100% guarantee there'd be no order is if there was no landfill. So, but we are mindful of the need, and I think this is where we have come in, identifying concerns, and what I've been doing with sort of Steve and Thomas for a number of sort of months here, is trying to get these robust conditions into the planning permission regime. And the condition 3, which is about ceasing operations there if we are not satisfied the things are being dealt with on site, that's quite a powerful condition.
Yeah.
And obviously we will sort of look at advising the planning authority along the process, and we will sort of assist them with any enforcement action that is needed there.
Yeah.
So the other sort of challenge that the site they do have under the environment permitting regime, they have best available techniques as a sort of option with regard to the controls they put in. So the controls they can do for odour mitigation should be the best available techniques that's available at the time. Some of that stuff is wording that Natural Resources Wales need to be involved with, because they are the experts for landfill sites and for odour mitigation and for what is best available techniques. So I know it may sort of it sounded to me as if a lot of stuff's going to come to environmental health. It's got to be this joint enforcement approach.
Yes. Okay.
We cannot do it in isolation.
Thank you. Thank you. I am minded that we are spending quite a lot of time on this, but because it is, as is always the case with planning, it is so vital to sort of talk it through and get everything mentioned and answered. I don't want anybody to go away saying, oh, well, they didn't answer that and they didn't answer that. So I am minded that there's a balance to be made here between the questioning and the considered detailed answers to the questions. So I thank the officers so far. I think, Arwen, you sent in a written question, which has sort of been touched on, but did you want to say something first from members of the committee?
Yes, I did, Chair. I did indicate in my covering email that I would be requesting to speak as well.
That's fine, yeah.
Before I get into the body of my report, Chair, just like to make a couple of points. It's been constantly mentioned during the presentation today about the 2 members. Can I remind committee that it's 3 members? Lower Brynhaman does exist as well. So I wanted to make that point. It's so I get disappointed, Chair, that Lower Brynhaman seems to be, because it's out on the extremities of the county borough, very close to Carmarthen, that it's not part of this authority. Well, it very much is.
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
disappointed, that so often Lower Brynhaman is excluded. I represent Lower Brynhaman and Targwaith. They are there and they should not be forgotten.
No,
Just
before you move on, Councillor, I'm totally, if you've got the impression that the committee is only considering 2, it was only because it was the 2 speakers that I was referring to, not generally that there were only 2 councillors involved. So my apologies for that, if that's come across.
Not from you, Chair, but from the officers, quite frankly. I need the officers to remember that Lower Brynhaman does exist.
Okay.
And the second point I want to raise before I get into the body of my address, Chair, is that this is very much a land-raised site. There's a bit of a misnomer here about calling it a landfill. It's a land raise. It's actually raising the land up above other levels. So we mustn't let that disappear from our thoughts and understanding of what we're talking about. Anyway, Chair, the most important issue under consideration for this application, as has so eloquently been stated so far, is odour derived from the site and any possible health issues that may be associated with it. There has historically been an issue with odours from the site, but none more so than a spate of complaints last year. I have received complaints from residents in Lower Brynhaman, which is 3 miles away from the site. And I have also personally witnessed odours from the site, which I have referred to Natural Resources Wales and raised at meetings of the Site Liaison Committee. However, despite several referrals to NRW, the regulator, and this authority's environmental health and trading standards, who at one point served an abatement notice, there have been further complaints of odour emanating from the site some very recently. Chair, I believe that it is important to note that the site is currently operating without the benefit of planning consent, which expired in September 2018. The fact that the site was not completed at that time and still has spare capacity is heavily influenced by the increase in recycling, which has resulted in less waste diverted to landfill. Therefore, I don't quite understand the claim in this report on page 22 of a, quote, significant increase in the amount of material landfilled in Pwllfa Watkin in 2018. On that point now, Chair, may I thank Mr. Ball for his response, which is included in the amendment sheet to my question. So that's addressed my question. Now, I accept the complexities rather that are involved with this, but I thought it was worth submitting that question in advance so that the answer can be clearly defined and explained to committee.
Yes, we are obliged to you for submitting it in advance, Councillor.
So I thought it was a good exercise to do that. Now, Chair, I'm certain that many residents of the surrounding villages have endured, and I mean endured, the site for so long because of the availability of a household waste recycling site on site. However, that facility was closed in 2019. Since then, it has just accepted residual waste, and to exacerbate that matter, waste imported from areas outside the county borough. Chair, I could go on for very much longer, but I'm conscious of time constraints and this less than ideal way we are having to convene meetings during these very difficult times.
Thank you.
Before I conclude, however, I do want to mention the conditions. Now, despite the robust conditions that are proposed, I'm afraid I cannot support the recommendation in front of us today, and I will therefore be voting against. The reason behind that decision is that despite numerous complaints about odour, the company has clearly failed to satisfactorily address the problem. Therefore, my decision complies with the revised EU Work Framework Directive 2008. Waste management should be undertaken, quote, without causing nuisance through noise or odour, and that is to be found on the bottom of page 18 and the top of page 19 of the report. Chair, it's all very well to have robust conditions, but when it gets to the point of having to enforce them, it is too late because the problem has already occurred. The only positive way to eliminate odour problems is to eliminate the cause of it. And Chair, for those reasons, I will be voting against the recommendation today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcock. I would add that obviously the conditions that are being put before members today, they do include the 7-day clause. So we can only judge planning applications on their basis of merit, that what's before you today. And I know that local members do have long memories, and you don't have to have such a long memory as all of you have eloquently put today. However, I would like you to take into account that the officers of the council were not in control of what was happening at the site due to the fact that Natural Resources Wales were involvement, and it is difficult under the LDP. We have responsibilities to provide a site. It is under the LDP, so it's very difficult to sort of say, well, we're not going to have it anymore. As Mr. Ball has put in his address to the committee, we are obliged to provide this. We have agreed to provide this. It is in the LDP. What is before you today is taking into account all of these complaints and issues of odour, and to the best of our ability as a county borough, putting in the conditions, and I think you've heard from the officers concerned and maybe felt their frustration as well, in that they have not always had the best results from NRW. We can't back away from that. It's been stated that NRW haven't had complaints. Well, quite clearly they have had complaints. This before you today is a method whereby we can comply with everything that we are supposed to comply with. The resident safety, and I'm going to come back to Calvin because I don't think he's quite covered the safety aspect of that. I'll just come to you in a moment. And complying with our responsibilities as a county borough, a planning authority, and providing the site. I would like to come back to Kelvin then, just on that one point of safety, because I think two members actually said about safety. Is safety being taken at the utmost seriousness on this? And can I have your comments on safety for the residents?
Well, we're looking at this from an environmental health point of view, from the nuisance point of view and the public nuisance. And we haven't sort of had anything that I've seen about safety or seen any reports which indicate there may be a safety sort of issue here.
Right.
So it may well be. I need to sort of come back on that. Cause I'm not really. The gas is normally once it's in the atmosphere is normally about a nuisance issue, and the fact that you can smell the gases from the property. So
yes.
if you sort of,
there is an odour issue, yes.
Yes, there's definitely an odour issue, and that's the sort of the angle that Environment Health have been looking at this from. Right. We talk about safety, that is something a little bit different. Yeah. However, I'm not aware of any sort of stuff out there that's been brought to my attention, which highlights a safety issue from the gases at the residential properties.
Okay, that's fine. Could I have a comment then from either Mr. Ball or Thomas regarding that? Safety.
Yeah, Tom's with his hand. I was gonna defer to his technical expertise
Thomas,
on that one.
Thomas.
Sorry, I wasn't necessarily going to comment on safety as such. Actually, I was actually going to mention something else at the time, but yeah, sorry. Yeah, as Kelvin was saying, yeah, I mean, the main thing in terms of safety, yeah, is it would be dealt with more by the environmental health department, really, in terms of, you know, odour and everything else, but also, you know, in NRW and via the EPR, environmental permitting regs would also be looking at, you know, in terms of safety. I was actually just putting my hand up. I don't know if it's a slight diversion there, but I just wanted to mention the policy side of things again, and the you know, the rates of recycling and landfill and everything else, because I know the Councillor Alvin Woolcock mentioned that earlier on. Yeah, as I say, slightly off topic what we were just talking about, but I know it was mentioned previously about the TAN being out of date. Obviously, as Steve said, it is still the relevant policy. But whilst the TAN is quite old now, you know, we do carry out annual waste monitoring reports, so we do have data that is quite recent. And I know obviously Councillor Woolcock expressed a surprise at the 2018 there was an increase in landfill. You know, that was the case. You know, we have an officer with us working in the policy department, and he does that. He collates that data every year for the whole South West Wales region, and that is live data that comes from NRW and from the sites themselves. So you know, obviously, whilst there is and we encourage you know, an increase in recycling, unfortunately, you know, it's just the reality that there is still a residual element of waste that cannot be recycled. Unfortunately, that's just a fact. So that residual waste, as it is, does need to be dealt with. And at the moment, in the short term, as we've already identified with towards zero waste, you know, looking to 24, 25, landfill is providing you know, the capacity to deal with that element of residual waste until there are new technologies that come on stream. Obviously, you know, all waste applications were always very controversial as well. So, you know, to just say, oh yes, we'll do this, isn't easy, because a new development to do with this residual waste, it can take several years to get through planning. So landfill is very much kind of seen as a, shall we say, a stopgap, whilst alternative technologies are being developed and then getting planning permission to be able to operate as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Thomas. I have an indication from the Vice Chair who wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yeah.
As Thomas just mentioned, the TAN, I just thought I'd pick up on that as well, just to reinforce the point that although the policy was created a long time ago, as far as I understand it, the calculation around the capacity of landfill sites is based on live volumes of waste being generated. So as the volumes of residual waste being generated decrease, the calculation in terms of how much landfill space you need takes that into account. So as far as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're not calculating the landfill capacity based on the rates of residual waste from X number of years ago. We're actually looking at the actual quantity of waste being produced. But the point I really wanted to make was around these conditions, really. It's been quite a convoluted and technical conversation, really, around the existing position, the previous position, and the proposed position of where we might end up with this plan application. And I'm, I suppose, trying to get that clear and summarise it as best I can. As far as I understand it, and we had some good discussions with the officers about this as well. The site is currently without planning permission, and therefore, as Mr. Ball explained earlier, we can't enforce conditions because there are no live conditions on the site. So regardless of the effectiveness or not of previous conditions, currently there are none that we can actively enforce under planning legislation. So the only avenues open to us are environmental health legislation and NRW, which we've had a good discussion around the effectiveness or not of NRW. So we've been in a position where effective enforcement of the site has been quite difficult to achieve, and I think the comments from members, local members, pretty much explain that very well. But I think it's important to emphasise what this application is proposing to do.
Yes.
In terms of improving the effectiveness of that enforcement. And I kind of wanted to directly address Councillor Purcell's point around the order management plan, and the fact that it was in place and why it's not been as effective as it might have been. And I think the answer to that is that NRW have been responsible for enforcing that order management plan.
Yes.
And I think the point that we need to emphasise is that the conditions on this application bring some of the control in terms of enforcing that order management plan to the council in terms of planning legislation, in terms of breaching of conditions.
Yes.
And that's really important to emphasise, because this isn't, although environmental health have a role to play and have got the trained and experienced officers in that field, the decision to enforce on the conditions is a planning concern that will be dealt with by the planning department, and as I'm sure Steve Ball will explain, can be done quite swiftly. If we get information that a condition has been breached, we can issue a letter, issue notices very quickly on these sites, which is something that's not been available to us in the interim period where the site hasn't had an active planning permission, and previously to that, the conditions were not robust enough to allow us to take action in that way. So I'm just trying to outline quite clearly the difference that we're going to see in terms of the enforcement capability if this application is passed. And in my view, it does address the concerns of the local members in terms of the enforcement action that can be taken. Now, I think, we all can see and we're all aware that this is a landfill site and it's not going to have no impacts. And it would be disingenuous for me or anybody else to claim that this site won't have any impacts on the residents. But what we need to do is ensure we can limit the impacts to levels that are acceptable under the terms of the conditions, under the planning legislation, under environmental health and their permit. And it's clear that the site has not been doing that in the past. But it's my view, in terms of the conditions that are imposed now, that we'll be creating additional controls that will compel the operator of the site to improve their performance in terms of odour, because the consequences of not doing that will be significant in comparison to the position we're in now. They are very much aware of the effectiveness or not of NRW and the ability that we currently have to enforce, and that will change significantly if this application is approved. I just wanted to make that point clear.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. It's very succinctly put. And I would also add that it was mentioned that some of these would be regarded as duplication maybe by NRW, but the fact is our officers recommend them because they feel that in the past it hasn't been the case where this intervention might happen from NRW. So if members are happy to rely on our officers' opinion, the opinion is to approve. Councillor Davis, I don't know whether you're aware, but we can see all your notes that you've put up against your screen there, and I can see that you wish to speak. So, Councillor Rosalind Davis, please.
Thank you, Sean. You've been quite good in presenting the conditions that we should agree to it, but I'm going to assume that the main gases from the tip at present is hydrogen sulfide. Am I correct?
Can an officer answer that? Any officer? Thomas or
Tom?
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, the landfill gases are they're quite a mix, to be honest. Methane would make up probably the largest proportion of the gases coming from the site there. I don't know if Kelvin has got any.
Councillor Davis?
Sorry?
Does that help you at all?
Yeah, because, well, to be fair, that, I'm sure there are lots of odours as such, and there are lots of gases coming from many a tip, and of course, especially with hydrogen sulfide and methane, and of course, they're poisonous gases. How are we going to deal with that?
Councillor, I did ask earlier on with regards to nuisance or safety, and I had an answer that as far as they know, they haven't got any issues of safety. Most of this is odour nuisance rather than safety.
But of course, odour and poisonous gases should be with safety as well, because it's not safe, is it?
I'm going to ask officers, are the levels of these gases at a safety level rather than an odour nuisance level?
If it wasn't at a safety level, then NRW would have to intervene, via the environmental permitting regulations. I mean, they need to be safe, and they are tested under that EPR environmental permitting regime.
Right, I'm aware that Councillor Hunt wants to come in, but both Leah and Kelvin have both sort of indicated they wish to enter. Is it because of what the councillor has just said, or is it a different issue?
I don't know if Kelvin was going to say the same as me. I might be able to offer a little bit of an explanation on the gases because of my experience of dealing with contaminated land. So not active landfills as such, but certainly historic landfills where we look at measuring ground gases and the impact they will have. The highest risk from those gases from an active landfill is very much going to be to workers and be an occupational health and safety risk that will need to be monitored, obviously, by the site in accordance with their health and safety risk assessment. Mm-hmm. The off-site risk would be incredibly low, given that the gases will be diffusing to atmosphere. They are much more a risk to health in high quantities, in confined spaces, in close contact. The diffuse risk from these sorts of gases is incredibly low, and I don't envisage that being something that needs any sort of further mitigation from us. The controls for the health and safety element will be much higher.
Thank you, Leah. That's very helpful. Councillor Davis, does that answer your question? It is an odour issue because of the diffuse nature of anything that comes into the atmosphere.
Yes, I realise that, but I just wanted to know what the main gases were, because, you know, these are poisonous gases at the end of the day.
Right, okay. Councillor Hunt, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I firstly...
You've gone on to mute.
Well, that went on its own then, I promise you, I didn't touch it.
It's okay, it's
But,
okay.
I don't know what you heard. I just want to thank Mr. Ball for a comprehensive report on all the agencies that have to put this together today. I mean, it's very important we have as much information when making decisions, certainly on something as not just emotive, but an important decision. Can I thank the 3 localish members, those that are here today representing their constituents, which is, and they've done it very eloquently. And brought a lot of interesting information that I certainly wasn't aware of, which is key again when you make decisions. I wanted to ask a question and bring up well, questions they probably all are really, but as far as the operator goes, are they obliged to have a quantitative emission data of landfill operations from time to time, from the very beginning up until the situation, as you mentioned, we come into the end, particularly in relationship as modern operations, the current fresh waste and landfill gas are composited or on site. I just wondered, gathering data is important for you as officers and NRW, and again, I will reiterate that my confidence in NRW is pretty much like everybody in this meeting today, probably, and that's key when we're dealing with odour. Now, this application that we've spoke hours on, Chair, and I thank you for allowing me to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, I am trying to sort of draw it to a conclusion, but
and I think it's revolved around the odour. I mean, that's the key here, and I'm well aware of all landfill sites have these orders. I would have thought in the technology we have today, we could have dealt with that anyway going forward. However, when landfills are decommissioned or cease to exist, you mentioned restoration. I'm just wondering, is the order still in the air? Will these communities still have to put up with this order? Because when I drive down to Carmarthen, and I don't know the name of the one there, just on the way in, that is absolutely horrendous smells and odours for miles. And again, when we have summers and people want barbecues and so forth, it's an impossible task when you've got that sort of horrid smell in the air. So I just wondered, have we got any historical sites that have closed for many years that the orders are dispersed and disappeared altogether? Last thing, Chair, from my point of view, I certainly agree with Councillor Woolcock today. I think unless we can have an assurances that the dealing with order, you know, it's not fair, it's not right. I appreciate what Sean, Councillor Percy have said, and if we could manage it, but it's confidence. This is my last point. It's something that you have to have in life, and not just as a councillor, but as anybody living anywhere in any community. You need confidence in what not just the council are doing, NRW are doing, and any other agency that are dealing with a problem. I haven't got the confidence that this problem will be dealt with after this meeting. I have no doubt that Mr. Ball and his team and all those involved will do their utmost to assure us that they will deal with it. But again, I am sorry, I wave on the lack of confidence that anything would actually change. And for that reason, again, sorry, this is my heart instead of my head perhaps taking over. but I'm reluctant at this stage, unless I hear a little bit more, to support this application this morning. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, right. Issues raised by Councillor Hunt? Anybody want to answer those?
I think some of the, again, I might ask Tom if he's got some information. I mean, you've talked about the quantifiable landfill data and stuff. I mean, I don't know, Tom, whether you've got information about how much they have to record in terms of what they do, but obviously I imagine we've got details in terms of what they've done on this particular permission in terms of over the years. And I think in terms of the historical sites, again, and the one we referred to in Carmarthenshire, given that you're asking Carmarthenshire, you may be able to give some feedback about that. What I would say is, just from a plan perspective, covering your last point, Councillor Hunt, I think it's a shame, really, to say, you know, I know that you have faith in me and my team and us as an authority. What I would ask is for that to transpose itself into the confidence that this committee shows in your officers to enforce the robust set of conditions that we are recommending, because ultimately if we didn't feel that they were appropriate, or that we could take appropriate action to do so, then we wouldn't be recommending approval. And if I think if members were to say we haven't got confidence in NRW and yet we're still going to refuse this, that to me displays a lack of confidence in your officers to say that we will seek to do this. However, that being said, I also appreciate that this is a long-standing issue that all the local members and the members of the committee want to have that confidence. They are there. I mean, sorry, Jed, the three conditions are set in place. They are as robust a set of conditions on odour as any consent will probably ever have had in and around this area. They bring it back into the control of the local planning authority. In the discussions I've had with Kelvin and Leah, they are aware of this. We've formulated these based upon discussions with Carmarthenshire, with Leah and Kelvin and myself. We are all confident that they are enforceable and robust conditions that will, as far as practically, address this issue. Now, ultimately, members have to make the decision whether they accept the requirement for landfill to continue, and within that context, that this is the most acceptable way forward for the next 3-year period to protect the amenity of residents. And we, as officers, give our assurance that we will robustly enforce those. The operator is here today, will have listened to the last 2 hours worth of debate about this.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain will have been left in no uncertain terms how strongly everyone on this screen feels about odours at this site, and that at the first failure of this site to react to those issues, should permission be granted, will rigorously be defended and enforced by this authority. I don't think there'll be any doubt about that. But ultimately, each of the members need to determine, whether they feel that those are appropriate set controls, but within the context of a national and local policy that says we require this facility to continue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. I would remind members as well that the recommendation is based on the professional officer's opinion, taken into the round of everything that they have to take account of. You do need to have some sort of planning reason to sort of go against what officers are recommending. And I was just wondering what would be in your minds as a reason for not going with the recommendation, as to your rationale for that. We have got the LDP. We are obliged to provide a site. The officers have even gone sort of as far as do some sort of duplication to NRW against the norm, just so that this authority can have much more tighter control over this site. And I'm just wondering if I could come back to either person who said that they would go against the recommendation, as to your reasoning. Councillor Wilcock or Councillor Hunt?
Yes, Chair. I thought I made it clear in my presentation.
I beg your pardon. Yeah.
I did suggest that it complies with the revised EU Waste Framework Directive
Of course you
2008.
did, yes, yes, yes.
Waste management should be undertaken, quote, without causing nuisance through noise or odour.
And the officers today have given the full backing of their knowledge that to the utmost degree they cannot say that there will be no odour. However, even if you take away if you vote for a refusal of planning permission, that indeed comes with its own set of problems, and the residents will in no way be home free if the refusal was granted, so to speak. So I'm conscious of time and I want to resolve this. So I'm going to, there's two people that have been indicating for some time, Thomas and then the Vice Chair. So I'm going to take those two and then I'm going to try and wind this up.
Thank you, Chair.
Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was just wanting to answer some of Councillor Hunt's queries with regards to the data. Like the waste, the different terms of waste streams, in terms of the waste accepted, that is all measured and that is recorded in the annual monitoring reports, as well as in the site's own records. Also, when we do attend the technical working parties, that which NRW attend, as well as the planning authority and members of the site, there are numerous. Well, there are lots of different data that's collected from the gas wells on trace gases, that the composition of the gas, the composition of leachate, the percentage of the concentration of the leachate, all that information is discussed in the technical working parties and is also required to be submitted under the environmental permitting regulations as well. I mean, obviously you've got your own opinions about NRW, but that information is required via that permitting regime.
Okay.
And then in terms of the old landfills, a lot of odour from landfill tends to come from the cells that are still open and that are still working on. Once the cells have been capped and lined, that odour will vastly reduce, and they'll have gas wells and drainage and everything else on site to try and reduce the concentration of leachate and obviously the concentration in the gases as well. So once the site has been capped, rainwater won't be able to get into the site and won't be able to permeate and form the leachate, which again is quite a big source of the odour. The landfill site in Carmarthen is Nantucket House, and yeah, they have had leachate problems there in the past. What it is, the kind of in between cells at the moment, so they've still got one that's semi-open whilst they're thinking about opening another cell, so there is still part of that site that is open to the elements, so it's still generating leachate, and there's obviously still the odour that's just coming from the waste. It hasn't been capped in its entirety, so that's why there is an odour here. Obviously on completion of this site, it would need to be capped, and a lot of the gas well infrastructure and the drainage would all need CQA or construction quality assurance then from NRW as well, as it's been constructed prior to placement of capping and everything else, and prior to the restoration being completed then. I hope that answers your queries, but I can't think of anything else to say about that one.
That's fine. Councillor Hunt, be brief, because as I say, we haven't even got onto the second item yet, but although I do understand that everything pertains to both, probably. Councillor?
I will be brief. I thank Thomas for the response, and as I was trying to intimate too, is that it doesn't go away, it gets reduced. But what I wanted to come back on is to Mr. Ball. Just to clear this up, I have the utmost confidence in our officers and all those that carry out this work. But he sort of mentioned that if why I was going to vote against suggested that I didn't have that confidence, and I think that's a little bit naughty of him to sort of mention that, because I wasn't quite happy for him to sort of go down that road. I have a confidence, but looking at the report, looking at listening to the local members, I'm entitled, Chair, as you know, to vote in whichever way I see fit, given the information supplied to me today. And I just want to clear that up, that I have got the highest respect and confidence in the officers carrying out their work. I just clearing that up. Thank you.
That's fine. Thanks, Councillor Hunt. We just, yes, I know Steve wants to come back on that. Steve?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I mean, no, I get that, Councillor Hunt. I wasn't trying to upset you, shall we say. It's more I have to put forward the views that as officers, we are putting forward a set of conditions that we feel will address these issues within the context we've talked about, and it is important. But what I would say is the way this debate is going, there's a couple of members, shall we say, that are clearly veering on the alternative view, and I don't have an actual recommendation as such, but Councillor Walcott, you've talked about the fact that this is me interpreting here. You're effectively saying that your view is that notwithstanding the landfill void capacity within the region, continuation of landfill at this site is not considered to be acceptable because the unacceptable impacts arising on the amenity of nearby properties as a result of odour, blah, blah, blah. That's what you are saying, and that's fine. I get that. If that is your view supported by others, I think that an alternative recommendation would probably need to be put forward with the appropriate wording for members to actually vote on as an alternative recommendation, i.e. the refusal on the basis of. And I think that's important to do so, to understand whether members are minded to refuse on that basis. Rebecca in legal may be able to give some advice on that, but I think it might be appropriate, and it might be appropriate given the length of this debate. If members were minded to do that, it might be worth having a 5-minute recess for one or more of those members to draft something for members to actually vote on as an alternative recommendation, because it would need to be, we would need to understand precisely what the objections were.
Yes. Unless members are minded to indicate to me that they are willing to put forward an amendment, I will go with the recommendation and take that to a vote. So is anybody minded to put a recommendation in other than the officer one? Or are you just saying to me, I cannot vote for that?
Chair, with your indulgence, I'm not quite sure where we're going here with a need for an amendment.
No, there isn't a real need. You can just vote against it if you wish to, yes.
I clearly indicated that I am unable to support this recommendation.
Yes, I understand.
Based on what the report itself says on the European directive.
Yes.
So I don't know whether you want to take a legal view on that, Chair.
Rebecca, at the moment, I'm minded just to go to, after the debate is completely finished, and I think we're at that point now, go to recommendation and ask members whether they are, which way they're going to vote on this. There may be members who cannot support it, but that doesn't mean to say that they wish to put forward an amendment. I'm sure that any of them that wish to put forward an amendment will indicate to me, but so far have not had indication of an amendment. So I'm quite happy that maybe there's members who don't wish to vote for this recommendation. Can I have your advice then?
The process, Chair, normally would be that we would have a vote on an alternative recommendation to be put forward. So that would be a recommendation of refusal on the basis of whatever reasons.
Okay.
And the committee would vote on that. If that is approved, then that would become the substantive recommendation, and you then vote on it again as the substantive recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. So that is basically where I am. I'm ready to go to recommendations. So does anybody in the committee wish to put forward an alternative amendment to that recommendation? Councillor Hunt, your hand is up. Is it in answer to that question?
Yes, Chair, it's not a legacy hand.
Okay.
I needed to take your advice and Rebecca's advice again.
Yes.
Irrespective of an amendment,
yes.
If more members vote against the officer's recommendation,
yes,
without an amendment, what is the legal position then? That's what I needed to clarify.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, Rebecca, normally it would just be refused?
It can be done that way. That's not the normal process that we would do. It would achieve the same result.
But what I would prefer, if members are minded not to vote that way, is to put forward an amendment and therefore stating their reasons why they would not go with the vote to recommend approval. And I would ask them then to formulate a form of words, and as Steve has said, I would give a recess of 5 minutes if any member were minded to do that.
I agree. I think it would be more appropriate and more the normal process for an alternative recommendation to be put forward first.
Okay.
Rather
and allow
than
members to vote on it. Yeah.
Yeah, rather than voting on what we have in front of us currently, that potentially being voted down or voted against, I should say, and then doing a new one at that stage.
So that's the state we are, members. I'm ready to go to recommendation. Does anybody have a mind to put forward an amendment to this recommendation? No, I see none. No. Okay, then on that basis, I will go to the recommendation on page 37. Excuse me for just getting back to there. 37. The recommendation is that, subject to Welsh ministers withdrawing their holding direction under Article 18 of the Town and Country Planning Development Management Procedure Wales Order 2012, that planning permission is granted subject to the conditions listed in the report. Do I have someone to propose that, please? Vice Chair? Thank you. Anybody to second?
I'll second Suzanne Renkes.
Oh, Suzanne Renkes. Thank you, Suzanne. So we have had a proposer and a seconder. I will now ask Jane to go through the roll call of the voting members of the committee, ask them if they've been present for the whole item and which way they intend to vote, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could start with you, Councillor Chair, are you what I know you've been present for the whole of the meeting.
I have been present for the whole meeting and I will vote for the recommendation.
Right. Councillor Percy, please.
Yeah, I've been present for the whole of the meeting. I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Councillor Ross Davis, please. Councillor Davis. You're on mute, Councillor Davis.
Oh, it's not working most of the time.
That's okay. We are terrible difficulties.
And my battery is very, very low.
Okay.
I have been here for the whole meeting.
Yes.
And I am voting against the recommendation.
Right. Councillor Hunt, please.
I have been here for the whole meeting and I'm voting against the recommendation.
Councillor Woolcock, please.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I've been here for the whole meeting and I'll be voting against the recommendation.
Councillor Williams, please. Chris Williams.
I've been present for the whole meeting and I'm voting against the recommendation.
Councillor Suzanne Renkes.
I've been here for the whole meeting. I'm voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Right, Chair, that's 3 for the recommendation and 4 against.
Okay, that application is refused then, based on the voting of the committee today.
But Chair, we need to understand on what grounds and on what.
Yes, I would like to ask now the people who have voted against.
This is why we were looking for an alternative recommendation, wasn't it, Chair?
I know, but I didn't get anybody to give me a recommendation, an amendment, sorry. So would you please, Councillor Davis, give me the reasons why you are voted against?
Because of the statement that Councillor Arwyn Wilcock made. Is that fine?
Yeah, Mr. Ball. Yeah, the Councillor Wilcock actually wrote his down, didn't he? He said on the basis of.
I don't think we have anything that's sufficient for a reason for refusal at the moment. I understand that it would appear on odour. I mean, Councillor Williams, I know that you have voted against, but obviously we haven't heard from you today, so I can only assume. I mean, I have to say, if people are voting against, I would expect members to let us know or what ground so we could respond to it. I'm assuming it's odour again
yes,
for everyone.
Yes, odour. Can I just say, Councillor, Mr. Ball, I do respect the department and all your officers, but the odour issue, and as Councillor Alwyn Wilcock has commented previous, is it's the outside waste coming from there. It's not from our authority. Like you said about the outside waste, and the odour issue, I do feel is a big thing for those communities.
Okay, I mean, I understand. I mean, the issue about waste coming in, it's a regional facility. It's not just a local facility. It is about the region anyway. But so odour, I believe everyone's objecting on odour. So I think out of the 4 members who voted to refuse, I think between them they need to come up with a recommendation, you know, a wording of the reason for refusal. Rebecca, would you say we'd need to actually vote on the wording? Because
I think it would be prudent to do so.
I think we have to.
So we have to have
can we have a recess, perhaps?
Of course, you can have a recess, 10 minutes then for officers to converse with the members who have refused their vote, as to if you can come up with a reason amongst you that is a sound planning reason.
Chair,
so yes, who's that?
It's me, it's Jane. Can I suggest that we give a time and we'll say that we'll reconvene at 25 to 1?
Yes, I was just looking at yes, we will. It's just nearly 25 past. We'll reconvene at 25 to, and I'm hoping that then we'll have that form of words ready. Thank you, and I'll see you in 10 minutes.
There we are.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Are we staying on this call, Chair?
I think we need to pause the recording. We cannot have this with other. We cannot have this with members of the public in the room.
Hang on, we just stop the recording.